I never thought this day would come. After 5 years of silence, Mark knocks on my door, his face pale, eyes wide with shock. "Sarah," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just found out. Why didn't you tell me?" His gaze flickers to the 3 kids playing in the yard, laughing, unaware of the storm brewing. My heart skips a beat. How could I have kept this secret for so long? How could I keep the truth from him all these years? The truth that those 3 kids, the ones he's never even met, are his. I take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The lies, the fear, the guilt, they all rush to the surface. I thought I could keep this hidden forever. But now, after all this time, the truth is out. Mark is standing in front of me, asking questions I can barely answer. "They're mine, aren't they?" His words hit me like a freight train. I swallow hard, feeling the weight of the past 5 years crash down on me. All the things I've kept inside, all the reasons why I never told him, why I never let him know. I knew this day might come, but I wasn't ready. The truth has a way of slipping out when you least expect it, and now there's no turning back. My mind races. What do I say? How do I explain this to him? I want to tell him the truth, but the words are stuck in my throat. All I can do is stand there frozen as Mark waits for an answer. The silence between us stretches on, unbearable. Finally, I take a deep breath and speak, my voice trembling. "Yes, Mark. They're yours." The words feel like a confession, and in a way they are. I've been carrying this secret for so long, and now it's out in the open. Mark's face falls. The shock, the disbelief, the anger. It's all there. I can see it in his eyes. But there's something else too. Something softer. Something like hope. He looks at the kids, his kids, for the first time, and for a moment I see him as the man he once was. The man I loved. But then the moment passes and the weight of reality sinks in. This is a lot to take in. For both of us. Mark's voice breaks the silence again, low and serious. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? Why keep this from me? I don't have an answer. How do you explain something so complicated, so messy? There's so much history, so many reasons. But none of them matter now. All that matters is what comes next. The future. The kids. And Mark. What happens now? I don't know. I just know that nothing will ever be the same again." I had no idea how to answer him. Mark just stood there staring at me, his face a mix of confusion, disbelief, and anger. The words I had kept hidden for so long now seemed impossible to say. It was like the moment had frozen, and everything I feared, everything I avoided, was finally catching up with me. The kids were still playing outside, unaware of the conversation unfolding between their mother and the man who once was their father. How could I have let this happen? How could I have kept such a huge secret for so long? "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah?" Mark's voice cracked, and I could feel the weight of his words hang in the air. "Why didn't you let me know? All these years I thought they were." He couldn't even finish the sentence. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself, but my heart was racing. It was all too much to process. How did I even explain this to him? How could I explain the choices I made when everything had been so complicated? We had a good life, or at least that's what I thought before things fell apart. But those 3 kids, his kids, were part of a bigger story that neither of us could have predicted. A story I thought I had left behind when we signed those divorce papers. "I thought I was doing what was best," I said softly, trying to make him understand. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. You have to believe that." Mark shook his head, his eyes full of emotion. "How could you keep this from me?" He sounded lost, almost like he didn't know who I was anymore. And in a way I didn't blame him. After all, the person he knew, the one he loved, was the one who made a decision that changed all of our lives forever. I could see the pain in his eyes as he looked at the kids again, their innocent laughter ringing in the background, unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. "You knew the truth, Sarah," Mark continued, his voice growing firmer. "You knew all along, and you never told me. Why?" I didn't have an answer. Not a good one, anyway. How could I explain the fear, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of responsibility that had haunted me every day? It was easier to keep the truth buried, easier to pretend that I could raise our children without his involvement, without him ever knowing the truth. But now the walls were coming down, and I had no idea what would happen when the dust settled. I finally found my voice. I was scared. I admitted, my words trembling. I was scared of what you'd think, of what it would mean for all of us. I never wanted to put you in a position where you had to make a choice. Mark looked at me, his expression softening just a little, though the hurt was still there. And what about now? He asked, his voice quieter. What happens now, Sarah? I didn't know what to say. There was so much to figure out. So much that had been left unsaid for so long. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that it wasn't going to fix itself overnight. But I also knew one thing. Everything was about to change. For better or worse, our lives were never going to be the same again. I could see the wheels turning in Mark's mind, the weight of what I had just told him sinking in. He wasn't just trying to process the fact that I had kept such a huge secret for 5 years, but that the kids, his kids, had been living with us all this time and he hadn't known. He took a few steps back, his hands running through his hair as he tried to regain some composure. I need to think, Sarah, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I don't know what to think. The words hung in the air, and for the first time in years we stood there as strangers. Mark was a man I once knew so well, but now I wasn't sure if he still saw me the same way. Take all the time you need, I said quietly, though my heart was breaking. I wanted to reach out to him to explain everything, but I knew there was nothing I could say that would make this easier. It wasn't just the secret that weighed on him. It was everything we had lost. Our marriage. Our trust. The life we had once built together. I could see the anger in his eyes, but beneath that, there was a sadness, a loss. It was as though he was mourning the family we once had, but had never truly understood what had gone wrong. Why didn't you let me be a part of their lives, Sarah? Mark's voice was quiet, but the pain was there, cutting through the words. I could have been there for them. For you. I felt my throat tighten, the guilt flooding in again. I didn't want to complicate things, I whispered. You had your life and I had mine. I thought it was better this way. He looked at me, disbelief in his eyes. Better? For who, Sarah? He shook his head, his expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. You took away my chance to be their father, to be a part of their lives. All these years, you took that from me. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had never intended to keep him from the kids. I had convinced myself that it was better for all of us, that we could move on and create a new life without the past haunting us. But looking at Mark now, I realized how wrong I had been. He had every right to know the truth. He had every right to be a father to his children. I'm sorry, Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt hollow, but they were the only ones I could offer. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now how much I've hurt you. For a moment there was silence. Mark stood there, his arms crossed, staring at the floor. It was as though he was trying to piece together the puzzle of our past, of everything that had brought us to this point. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I didn't believe it myself. Things would never be the same. As the minutes passed, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. What now? Mark finally asked, his voice tired, almost resigned. What happens next, Sarah? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what came next. All I knew was that the past was gone, and the future was uncertain. For all I knew, this could be the beginning of something new, or the end of everything. But whatever it was up to both of us to figure it out. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if we could do it. I stood there, silent, as the weight of Mark's question hung heavily in the air. What now, Sarah? His voice was calm now, but I could hear the exhaustion in it. The anger had faded, replaced by a quiet sadness. I couldn't blame him. It had been 5 years and now everything was falling apart. My thoughts raced, but no answers came. I had spent so long keeping this secret, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing, that I never considered what would happen if the truth came out. Now, standing in front of Mark, I could see the hurt in his eyes. He wasn't just angry at me. He was grieving the loss of something that was rightfully his. The chance to be a father to our children. The chance to be part of their lives. And I had taken that from him. I could feel my heart pounding as I searched for something to say. Something that would make things right. But the truth was, I didn't know what would make it right. I don't know, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wish I could tell you what comes next, but I don't know. I never imagined it would come to this. Mark looked at me, his eyes searching my face for some kind of answer. But I had none to give. I had made so many mistakes. I had hurt him in ways I didn't even realize until now. But how could I have known how much this would affect him? How could I have known that keeping the truth from him would leave this kind of scar? I need time, Sarah, Mark said, his voice steady now. I need to think about all of this. I nodded, understanding. He wasn't ready to forgive me, and maybe he never would be. But I couldn't change what had happened. All I could do was try to figure out what came next. I get it, I said softly. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Mark didn't respond. He just turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. I watched him leave, my heart breaking all over again. The kids were still outside, still playing, completely unaware of the chaos inside the house. I walked over to the window and looked out at them, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. I had always thought I was protecting them, but now I wasn't so sure. The kids deserved better than this. They deserved to know their father, to have him in their lives. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if that was even possible. I turned away from the window and sat down on the couch, feeling the exhaustion from the past few hours finally catch up to me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this. And I certainly didn't know how to make things right with Mark. I knew one thing for sure, though: everything had changed. The life we had built together was gone. And I didn't know if we could ever rebuild it. But I had to try. For the kids. For Mark. And maybe, just maybe, for myself. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. I just hoped that somehow we could find a way forward. Because right now I had no idea what the future held. I sat there in silence, my mind replaying the last few hours over and over again. Mark had left, and I could still hear the echo of his voice in my head. I need time, Sarah. I had given him the space he needed, but now the reality of everything that had happened started to sink in. I never expected any of this. I never thought that 5 years later, we would be standing here, broken and uncertain. The kids were inside asking about Mark, but I didn't know how to explain things to them. How could I? How could I make them understand what was happening between their mother and their father? I went to the kitchen and started cleaning, trying to keep my hands busy. Anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But it didn't work. It never worked. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. Mark knew about the kids, about everything I had kept from him. And even though he hadn't said it outright, I knew he was hurt. I knew that this secret had torn something deep inside of him. I felt guilty, but part of me also felt relief. The weight of the lie I had been carrying for so long was finally gone. I didn't have to hide anymore. But the relief was short-lived, because now the hard part began. How could I rebuild the trust we had once had? How could I make things right? And more importantly, could we ever go back to the way things were? I didn't think so. The past was gone, and there was no way to rewrite it. The only thing we could do now was try to figure out how to move forward. But how? Mark had always been a part of my past. A part of who I was, but now everything was different. I didn't know if we could go back to being that couple who laughed and dreamed about the future together. And what about the kids? They deserved to know their father. They deserved to have him in their lives. But what if Mark couldn't forgive me? What if the distance between us was too great? What if we couldn't figure out how to be a family again? I stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor, lost in thought. The kids were outside playing, completely unaware of the tension that had taken over the house. They were so young, so innocent. They had no idea what had been kept from them for all these years. And part of me wondered if they would ever understand. I didn't want to tell them everything now. They were too young. But at some point they would need to know the truth, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I wasn't ready for the questions that would come, for the way their little minds would try to make sense of it all. I wasn't ready to see the disappointment in their eyes if they ever found out how much I had kept from them. I had spent so much time trying to protect them, but in doing so I had created a bigger mess than I could have ever imagined. Mark had a right to be angry. He had a right to feel betrayed. I couldn't take that away from him. But what I could do was try to fix the mess I had made. I couldn't change the past, but I could do my best to move forward. But how could I fix something that seemed so broken? How could I fix something that had been broken for so long? I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what the future held. All I knew was that the only way to move forward was to take it one step at a time. But first I needed to face Mark. I couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. I had to see him again. I had to talk to him. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild what we had lost. I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. The time had come for me to face Mark, to try to make things right, or at least start the process of healing. I had spent so many days wondering how I would approach him, what I would say, but now that the moment was here, I found myself feeling more uncertain than ever. The house felt too quiet without the kids' laughter in the background, and every little sound seemed to echo in the stillness. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I was going to call him. I didn't know what I was going to say exactly, but I knew I needed to start somewhere. The dial tone felt like it lasted forever. When he picked up, there was a hesitation in his voice, as if he was trying to decide whether to answer or not. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice still guarded. "I didn't think you'd call." His words stung, but I understood. I had kept him at arm's length for so long, and now he was hurt, angry, and probably confused. I didn't blame him. "I need to talk to you," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was racing. "Can we meet?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet." I could hear the conflict in his voice, the struggle between wanting to be there for the kids and not knowing how to deal with everything I had just told him. "I understand," I replied, "but I need you to know that I'm here. I want to fix this. I want to do better for the kids, for you, and for me." There was another silence, but this time it felt a little softer, like he was considering my words. Finally, he spoke again. "All right. Meet me at the park in an hour. We'll talk then." I agreed, my hands trembling slightly as I hung up the phone. The next hour felt like the longest one of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about what was going to happen when we saw each other again. Would he listen to me? Could we have an honest conversation? Or would the anger still be too fresh for us to make any progress? When I arrived at the park, I spotted him almost immediately. He was standing by the fountain, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired. I walked up to him slowly, my heart in my throat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, taking in the quiet surroundings. The kids had always loved this park. It had been one of our favorite spots before everything changed. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up," Mark said after a long silence, breaking the tension. I gave him a small, uncertain smile. "I'm here," I said simply. "I'm sorry, Mark, for everything." His gaze softened just a little, but the pain was still there. "You've said that before, Sarah," he replied, his voice low. "But it doesn't make it any easier. You kept so much from me. I don't know how to get past that." I nodded, knowing there were no easy answers. "I know," I said softly. "I can't change the past, but I want to try to make things right. I want to be honest with you from now on about everything. I want to give you the chance to be a part of their lives. They deserve that, and so do you." Mark looked at me, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was listening or if he was just trying to process everything. But then, after a long pause, he spoke again. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can get past all of this, but I'm willing to try. For the kids." Hearing him say that felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but at the same time, I knew it was just the beginning. There was so much more to work through, so much more to understand. But for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to be a family again. I sat across from Mark, the park around us quiet and peaceful, but the tension between us was palpable. We hadn't said much since our last conversation, but I could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. There was still so much to process, so much we needed to work through, but for the first time in a long while, I could see a small flicker of hope in Mark's eyes. He wasn't angry anymore, but I could tell that forgiveness wasn't something he could just give away. We were both still trying to figure out how to move forward. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how to be a part of their lives after everything that's happened." His words stung, but I understood. I had kept him from them for so long, and now it was hard for him to know how to fit back into the picture. I wanted to tell him that we could figure it out, that I'd help him, but I knew it wasn't that simple. He had every right to feel lost. "I know it's going to be hard," I said quietly, trying to meet his gaze. "I know I've made a mess of things, but the kids, they need you. And I need you to be there for them. He looked at me, his expression still guarded. I don't know if I'm ready to just jump back in, he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I need time. This is all a lot to take in. I nodded, understanding. He wasn't ready yet, and I couldn't rush him. Take all the time. You need Mark. I'm not going anywhere. But I'll be here whenever you're ready. We sat in silence for a while, just taking in the moment. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. A small step toward something, even if we didn't know exactly what that something was yet. I've been thinking a lot, Mark said after a long pause. About the kids. About everything. I know I can't just erase the past, but I want to be a part of their future. His words made my heart skip a beat. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild something. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be bumps along the way. But the fact that he was willing to try was all I needed to hear. I'm so glad to hear you say that, I said, my voice soft but full of relief. It's going to be hard, but I believe we can do this. We can figure it out together. Mark looked down at the ground, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. I want to believe that, he said quietly. But I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise that things will just go back to the way they were. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his, and for a moment we just sat there silently. We didn't need to say anything else. The future was uncertain, but at least now we were both willing to face it. Slowly Mark stood up, his gaze meeting mine. We'll take it one day at a time, he said. That's all I can offer right now. I stood up too, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. One day at a time, I repeated, nodding. Maybe it wasn't a perfect resolution. Maybe things weren't going to magically fall back into place, but we were both trying. And sometimes that's all you can do. As we walked away from the park together side by side, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. We weren't there yet. But for the first time I felt like we had a chance. I woke up the next morning to the sound of laughter echoing through the house. The kids were already awake, playing with their toys in the living room. For a moment it felt like nothing had changed. But then I remembered the conversation Mark and I had the day before. It wasn't over yet. The road ahead was still long, and we both knew that. I made my way into the kitchen, where I started preparing breakfast, trying to focus on the normal, everyday tasks that used to bring comfort. As I cooked, I kept thinking about Mark, about what he had said. We were taking it one day at a time, but what did that really mean? How long would it take for him to feel comfortable around the kids again? How long before he felt like he could be their father? I didn't know. I didn't have the answers. But for the first time, I felt like maybe we were heading in the right direction. I heard a knock on the door, and my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there was Mark standing on the other side. His eyes were tired, but there was a softness to his expression that I hadn't seen in a long time. I thought we could have breakfast together, he said, offering a small, hesitant smile. I was taken aback for a moment. Was he serious? After everything, he wanted to spend time with us? I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me. Of course, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. As we sat down at the table together, with the kids still playing in the background, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I've been thinking, Mark said after a few minutes of silence. I know this isn't going to be easy. I know I've missed so much time, but I want to be here for them. I want to try. His words were exactly what I needed to hear. For so long, I had been afraid that we would never find a way back to each other, that the damage was too great. But sitting there with him, I realized that we were both willing to make the effort. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth it. I'm glad you're here, I said, my voice filled with emotion. It means more than you know. Mark looked at me, his expression soft. I'm not perfect, Sarah, he said quietly. I can't promise everything will be like it was before, but I want to be part of their lives. I want to try to fix this. It was all I could ask for. The kids came running over to the table, excited to see Mark. They didn't fully understand what was going on, but they knew that their father was there, and that was enough for them. As they climbed onto his lap and began telling him about their favorite toys, I could see the start of something new. The beginning of a relationship that had been put on pause for far too long. I wasn't sure what the future held, and I didn't know how long it would take for everything to heal. But for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. Maybe we couldn't fix everything in a day, but we could take the first steps. And that was enough. As Mark laughed with the kids, I realized that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that matter the most. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. One step at a time. I woke up the next morning feeling a strange sense of peace. The kids were still asleep, their little bodies curled up under the covers, and for a moment, I let myself just watch them. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, Mark had walked out of my life, and now here he was back in it trying to make sense of the mess I had created. The truth was I didn't know where we were headed, but I was willing to find out. We had both been hurt, both made mistakes, but there was still something left between us, something worth holding on to. I made breakfast as usual, and when the kids woke up, they ran into the kitchen, eager to start the day. The atmosphere was different now, lighter somehow. Mark was there, helping the kids with their breakfast, and for the first time in years it felt like we were a family again, even if it was just for a moment. We didn't talk much that morning, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding between us, a mutual acknowledgement that we were both still figuring things out. Mark helped clean up, and as we did the dishes together I couldn't help but notice how easy it felt. We had always been good together when we weren't caught up in our own baggage, and maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to that place. But there were still so many questions, so much uncertainty. What would our life look like moving forward? Could we truly rebuild the trust we once had? I wasn't sure, but I knew that I was willing to try. We spent the rest of the day together, the four of us, as if nothing had changed. We went to the park, the kids played, and Mark and I just talked. There were still moments of awkwardness, of hesitation, but the more time we spent together, the more it felt like we were beginning to heal. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment the world felt still. "I don't know what happens next," Mark said quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same, but I do know that I want to try. I want to be there for the kids, for you." His words, simple as they were, meant everything. "We'll take it one day at a time," I replied, my voice soft. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all you need. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, maybe we'd stumble along the way, but we were both willing to put in the effort. And that was enough for me. Mark stood up and stretched, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "One day at a time," he repeated. We stood there together, looking out at the horizon, knowing that we were embarking on a journey, one that would take time, patience, and understanding. But for the first time I felt ready to face it. We had a long road ahead of us, but we weren't walking it alone anymore.